camera, and the other is eyepiece projection. I think this is really great for opening up our astronomy for beginners and for those who are just getting into it, because they can use something they already have, a point-and-shoot camera. They can use their phone, and it's pretty exciting as well. I've seen a lot of people get really excited about this because they can see it right there, with their own phone, especially at star parties. And so I know Celestron's now rolling out a whole new line of actual adapters that go right onto what's called the Ultimate Duo pieces. They have a screw on where you just put it right on, so you don't have to fiddle around with trying to make sure it's the right fitting and everything. As you get into this, I'm not going to get a lot more into the imaging part of it. There is a presentation tomorrow on the imaging, but just remember you can use Barlows to increase magnification. You can use filters to either draw out colors or compress colors that you don't want. So, for example, on Jupiter or Saturn, you may want to use different filters to bring out some of the different colors. The bottom line is you'll need adapters no matter which way you go. You have to get some sort of adapter, and that can be the frustrating part. So that's a good place to go and talk to someone at an astronomy club or a star party and say, I have these two things, how do I put them together? I can't tell you how, I think I've got a whole box full of nothing but adapters at my house. Now the key difference though between deep sky imaging and planetary is grab as many images as you can. And so you're going to have turbulence of the atmosphere causing your image to go in and out of focus. And so really the goal is just try and grab as many images as fast as you can. In whatever method that may be. Again, a dedicated webcam or so. The Sony Handcam, I really am a big fan of that because you can get really good frame rates, really good resolution. It gives you some good image quality that you can work with once you export it out. The key thing to remember though is that you do want to save this in what's called a lossless format. So a lot of the cameras today, if you don't change the settings, or even in software, if you're using an image capture software, it will allow you to use what's called a compressed format. It will save space on your hard drive, but the way it's doing that is by losing image information. You don't want to do that. You want to try and maintain as much information as you can in your raw data. So stored in a lossless or an uncompressed format. AVI is probably one of the most common ones that you'll see. I'll talk a little bit more about the AVI format in a moment. BMPs, PNGs is an image format, also support no compression, so you can store it in TIFFs as well and FITs and some other formats. But again, key takeaway, just get your gear going and grab as many images as you can. We'll talk about why that's important next. So the one thing I did mention was file formats. And so I said I've been imaging for 14 years, and I've been fighting for file formats for 14 years. It seems like every time somebody comes out with a new device, they've got their own way of doing file formats, and so you'll have to convert it to get it to work with whatever software you have. In particular, I'm talking about Registax, and so Registax, it likes most of the image file formats, so it'll take TIFFs and JPEGs and BMPs, all the major file formats. But when it comes to the image files that it likes, it really only likes two types, MPEGs and AVI. So you probably will end up in today's world with an MP4 or a movie format, which is the Apple QuickTime format, and you'll need to convert that. The good news is there are several programs out there for free that will do that for you. AVI Debox is one, Virtual Dub is another, and so both of those programs will take your file in pretty much any format you can find. It's an open source product, it's updated regularly, and convert that to AVI. One trick that I will tell you that can be very frustrating is AVI format actually has a lot of different nuances to it, and so people will implement AVI differently. And so you may end up with an AVI file, you're all excited, you go to load it in Registax, and it crashes on you because you can't load the file. So that happens quite often. I've had quite a few different imaging programs that have given me AVI files, tried to load them in Registax, and they won't load. So you have two options in that case. One, you can use something like AVI Debox to resave it as an uncompressed AVI, and it converts it to a format that Registax likes. The other option you can do is save it as a set of images. And I know a lot of people that do stacking and processing are a big fan of taking things out and putting them into individual image files. You can do that as well, so you can save it out into a BMP format or a TIFF, whatever you would like. There's also another trick to it, and that is with a program called Castrator. It's an interesting name for the program, but what it does is basically crop a video file down. It's not as prominent as it was maybe 5 years ago, but it used to be a real problem. You would load these huge AVI files, and Registax would just crank away. And what you have is this whole huge black area with a little planet in the middle. And the reason why is it was processing this whole thing. You could select the region of interest to work with, but it was still having to deal with a large file. And so what was nice about Castrator is it does two things. One is that it will actually center your image, So if your planet's moving around, you will find the center of mass for the image, and then it will take all of your file and crunch it down, and basically crop out all of the black spaces around your planet, and then resave it into an AVI file. And the good news is it saves it in a format that Registax likes, so you don't have to worry about that. Yes?
That's really interesting to know. I ran into this exact problem with I had an AVI file. It was apparently not the flavor of AVI Registax.
Right.
Have you had better luck with either AVI Deluxe or Virtual Dub, relatively one working better than the other?
AVI Deluxe is probably the preferred one. I've seen it work with pretty much everything. It will convert it straight out. Virtual Dub lets you do a few more things to the file and lets you crop and edit, do some other things. But AVI Deluxe, if you want to choose one, I would go with that one. Pretty much it's been able to convert everything I've run across, and Registax definitely likes this format. So great question. Any other questions, by the way, so feel free to interrupt me, or I'll just run on along through the presentation. All right, so I know what everyone's anxious to get to. Let's talk about stacking and getting into the actual wavelets for planetary processing. So a couple of quick notes on Registax. Just by show of hands here, who has used Registax here in the room? So, okay, so quite a few people. There are other programs out there. There's AVI Stack. There's probably a list of probably 10 or 15 programs that are out there that do this. And I've tried probably most of them. I always come back to Registax. It just seems to get the job done for me. AVI Stack is another one that works really well, but it takes forever. I can do it in Registax in probably about 5 minutes, and AVI Stack can literally take an hour for the same file. And it does allow you to do some wavelet processing and some other things, but it seems much slower. And sometimes it's a lot more automated as well. So sometimes you get a result and you're like, I'm not really happy with that. Whereas Registax, I think you can tweak it a lot more than you can AVI Stack. But a couple of tips for you, if you do get into Registax, this is some of the things that I've learned over the past couple of years. A lot of people, when they start off, and I'll show in a moment, they just click set align point, align points, and they can run with it. What you should actually do is there's a scrub bar at the bottom, scroll bar, where you can go through the frames. You need to scroll through and find the clearest frame you have. Because if you've ever seen your image file, you'll see how it kind of goes in and out. Look for the one that's the clearest, because that's what Registax will use, is that as your reference image to align everything else to. So if you've got a fuzzy image that it's referencing, it won't get as good of alignment as it could. And remember, the whole the point behind stacking is to really look through a whole bunch of frames and figure out which of these data points shows up the most in a certain point, right? So if you don't have a good base reference image, it won't give you as good a data as it could. The data won't be as strong, so your signal noise won't be as strong. The next thing is to limit. So a lot of people will use the controls on the left-hand side. I'll show that in a moment. That lets you limit how many of the frames. It either says do 80%, do 90%, do X number of frames. What you can do though is after you do alignment, you can actually move that scroll bar as well, and you can look at the images and see where it starts to tail off. And so there's two things you're looking for. Has it moved way out of the frame, or is it just getting really fuzzy and doesn't look good, and you can discard those. But sometimes you'll get lucky and you'll have a really, your whole file has all good images in it, and you want to keep them all. Don't throw them all out. So I highly recommend you do that as well. Scroll through and don't just take the default that it took, but scroll it over and say, oh no, let me take another 10 frames. Every data point counts, so I try not to throw out any data. And then lastly, look at some of the other options. There are things like it creating a luminance. I haven't had good luck with that personally. It'll create a luminance layer that it uses, and to me it tends to give me white spots in my image. But one of the things I'll talk about in a moment is that every single file, every single target you have, they'll all end up differently. Sometimes that works great. And Registax has a lot of other features, a lot of other algorithms within the program as well that you can use when you're doing the stacking. Paul Maxson was one of the developers that was on the actual program. So if you want more details, he wrote a great little tutorial. All these links are I'm going to have it posted for you guys, by the way. There's a page at the end that shows all these. But he did a great tutorial that walks you through the best way to use Registax. And so since he helped develop it, I figured he knows what he's talking about more than I do. So that's a great tutorial to go and flip through as well. So now let's get into wavelets. What are they? Why do you care about them? And as I mentioned, why are they so magical to me? So as I mentioned back in, I've been imaging since about 1999, 2000. And I don't want to scare everybody though, so I wasn't spending that whole 14 years trying to figure out how to do planetary imaging. I had some breaks in between. Technology's progressed. I'd say really hardcore imaging I've been doing it for maybe 3 years in total time, 3 or 4 years. And so in 2011, this is when I actually did upgrade scope. So I went to my ETX 125. Before that, I had, which is a 5-inch scope. Before that, I had an ETX 70, which is a 70 millimeter scope. And again, aperture does matter. If you want to get clearer and clearer images, they do call the SCTs, the spectaculars, those are called planet killers. They're very, very good. The bang for the buck in terms of doing planetary, and SCT is fantastic. It doesn't mean you can't get great images. I know Robert has a refractor, and he gets great images out of his as well. So, but I really like the SCTs for imaging. But the point being that in 2011, I had my new ETX 125, and I got a brand new. I went out and got an HD Sony Handycam. Processed this image and sent it off to my family. Was saying how great and wonderful this was, one of the best images I had taken at that time. And then life got ahead of me, and I started working and moved. And I got up here to DC, and then I started doing deep sky imaging and really got into that and started learning more about processing techniques. And then along the way, I learned about this thing called wavelets, and then I realized that Registax has wavelets in it, wavelet capability. So I went back and I said, well, I wonder what that image would look like. So that is the exact same image, exact same raw file. That's with wavelets applied, because I always just skipped right past that. There's a little tab on it. You have to click on it, and I'll show you in a moment. But if you don't, there's a save image. You can save the image and you think you're done. And I was never paying any attention to the wavelet tab. And so now, it makes my wife really happy. I've got a whole other set of data to go back and process for the past couple of years. Because again, just amazing to me that all this data was hiding in there the whole time. So I've been talking about wavelets. What exactly is that? If I would at least give you a little bit of a more technical definition. Really what it's about is being able to differentiate signal from noise. And so in every picture you take, every image you take, there is some degree of noise in there. And this is not a new technique, it's been around for a while, but applying it in these manners to digital image processing is actually fairly new in the past probably 10, 12 years. And what it really does is it says, well, wait a minute, buried in your noise, there's some valid signal in there. And there's some algorithms that can allow you to actually tease out that little bit of data signal out of that noise. And that's really what it's about. So when you look at this fuzzy picture here, what it's really telling you is that it's made murky because there's noise in there. And so what you've got to do is figure out how to throw out the noise and keep some of the additional signal. And that's what you have on the right. That's when you remove the signal. Yes?
You say noise, you're including atmospheric disturbance?
Well, I'm sorry, say that again.
When you say noise, you're including the atmosphere.
For planetary, that's mainly what it is you're getting a lot of noise because of it. That's right. Because that's a great question. The question was, is the noise really coming from atmospheric disturbance? That's really where 90% of it's coming from, because when you do planetary, your exposure times are extremely low. So you have very little noise, unless you have when you're using the webcam like I was when I first started, those cheap, consumer grade for kind of FaceTime. Those webcams do tend to have a little bit of noise in them in the early days. They're really good today. But yeah, you're correct. It's mainly from the atmospheric disturbances that you're getting most of your noise.
Another point, you don't have good focus.
That's right. And you do at some point in there have to have a good focus point. So if you're just focusing from bad focus to worse focus, then the imaging is going in and out, you're not going to end up with something. So you still do need to take focusing into consideration. Try and get the best focus you can. So great points. Any other points or questions? Okay, great. So now let's actually get into it. So what does it look like? How do you use it in Registax? There's actually 2 different ways to do it in Registax. So once you've gone through and stacked your image, the first thing you want to do is choose the 2 different types. And again, this is something that I learned fairly recently. I always just left it on Gaussian, and I never looked at default, because to me I was like, well, the one that's checked has got to be the best, right? And I'll actually show you. I was surprised. The default one actually did a really good job. So the first thing to do, after you stack, as I mentioned, you'll be on this page, it'll say Save Image. These buttons won't be here. I'm going to show you guys this in a moment. And you have to actually click on this little wavelet tab, and then it'll bring up this screen. One of the things you'll probably want to do is use linked. So if you don't check that box, you have to move all these sliders way over to actually see it take effect. If you use linked, I'm not sure the technical underlines of it, but it does cause the logarithms to sort of all work off of each other. And so your moves make a lot more impact to the image. These are really important.
They can ask you a question about use linked. So when you click use linked, they don't all move together.
They,
Is this an algorithm?
that's correct. Great point. So yeah, when you check this button that says use link, it does not mean when you slide one, they all slide. That's a great point. What it means is that it's going to link how it's going to link the logarithms and the variables from these together. They take them all into account versus they just do them individually. I think it links the layers together. Is how it works. And basically that is what you're doing. Is when RegStack stacks it, it creates layers of information, and that's what it actually does. Is each one of these goes after a different layer of information in your image. So great point there. These are really important, denoise and sharpen. And so I'll show you that in a moment as well. But the denoise button is very important because what happens is, as you slide this slider over, what you're doing is you're telling me, give me more signal, but you're giving me more noise too. And so you'll see the image start to really degrade really quickly. But it does have some underlying logarithms where you can say, well, increase my denoising, just like you do on a deep sky image. It has some logarithms that will try and denoise your image more. So that will allow you to make that slider go even further over. So I'll show you that in a moment. As well as sharpening as well. So sharpening is a trade-off. Now, here's the other trade-off you'll have with all of this. Everything you do, as they say, there's no free lunch. Whenever you sharpen, anytime you denoise, anytime you move one of these sliders over, you are doing it at the cost of data. And so what you'll notice is that the further you go, your image starts to look a little bit different. It's in a good way, but it's also in a bad way. And a lot of your loss is in color loss. So you'll lose data for color. So you'll start to have a great looking image in terms of the detail, but you'll notice that the colors seem to change just a little bit. You lose some of those fine details between the color changes. So for example, imagine that you had it going from orange to brown. And it was a very nice gradient between those two, but it was sort of blurry. What you would then see is that you've got a nice sharp line, but it's not as smooth of a gradient. It's a very sharp jump from your brown to your orange. And that's what this is, that's the price you pay. And so that's really what it's all about, is finding the happy medium.
Dave?
Yes?
Can you explain what a layer is in terms of an image? And was there any significance with the use of 6? That's just all developers, that's all you really need?
Yeah, it's basically, this is the best practice. I'm not sure underlying how it works in terms of layers from a conceptual perspective. Basically, when you stack anything, it takes the data and puts it in layers, right? And it basically has different information at each layer about your image, right? It may be something about the luminance, maybe something about color, maybe something about the pixel mapping. So every layer has some different information, and basically that's what you're doing is, you can actually change this to one layer. And so it just kind of takes everything into account all at once. I don't know underlying RegStacks. That's the only bad thing about RegStacks. There's not a whole lot of information about kind of the underlying things.
What each layer does.
Yeah, you just have to really slide it and see. So unfortunately, maybe someone else knows more details. I've never been able to find that, but I don't know that there's a specific, it works on a specific part. I think it literally has to do with every single stack and how it processes that stack, and somehow it breaks it out into layers. I wish I had more info, but I don't. Any other questions? That's why I always say it's a little bit of magic. When you work with wavelets, I'm still a little perplexed as to how it works underneath. And the last piece is just your strengths. You slide that over, and it increases the amount of the logarithm that's applied. So think of your wavelet as a logarithm, and all you're doing is you're changing the variable of the logarithm to be bigger and bigger and bigger. And as I mentioned, what you're doing is it's costing you some information, such as color or quality in your image. The one thing you got to remember is once you do this, for the image I'm working with here, because I did crop it down using Castrator, you're going to see it applied to the whole image. But if I had my whole image, or if I had something that was maybe had other things in it, you may only see a little box, and you'll see it being applied to part of your image, and you're like, what's going on there? So that RegStacks doesn't have to use so much processing power, it limits it to a preview box, and you can change that box, but when you're working with it, it just does a little preview box. You have to click Do All, and it will apply everything to the whole image. And so that's one thing to watch out for, is that when I first started, I would forget to do that, hit save, and I go, wait a minute, how come only a little box is done on my image? So remember to do that. Okay, the other thing to point out is that you can do this. This is the default method that I talked about, and this is very interesting. I actually don't have any information on what actually happens underneath the covers here either. All I know is that you don't have to worry about signal, and you don't have to worry about noise. Now, what I saw this was more of the easy mode. You just start sliding these sliders around, and you see which ones look best. And I think what it's doing is somehow managing the underlying noise and sharpening for you. what I was really surprised about is it works pretty well. You know, you have to go and really tinker with the noise and the denoise and the string. The sharpening. This does it all for you, and I thought, well, because it's doing it automatically, you know, it wouldn't be as good. It actually is pretty good. It did a really good job. So that's if you wanted to go into more of an easier mode and not have to worry about, you know, messing with the denoising and the sharpening. You can do that. And then lastly, don't forget about all these tools over here. You have things that go from, you can look at the histogram itself, and you can actually stretch out the histogram. You can change the gamma in the image. You can do color mixing. You've got RGB align, so the different layers and channels, it will align them for you. Because sometimes you get that where, as it's stacking, you'll see a little shift. It almost looks 3D because you've got like the red is off a little bit, the green's off a little bit, and the blue's off a little bit, and this will line them back up. So you can do that as well. Again, it's image dependent. It depends on how much, you know, kind of turbulence you had in your image. What I would say though is kind of a best practice is when you slide these around, you can right-click on any of these controls and it'll reset it back to what it was. The best practice really is to do your wavelet and processing here, and that's it. Take it out into either GIMP or Photoshop or whatever your photo editing program is that you like, and that's where you actually will play with the gamma and the final settings on stretching it and do those sorts of things. It does a pretty good job here in Registax of letting you do that in the software. But basically people have better results. I've had better results in Photoshop. You just get a lot more control over the image. You can combine the effects together a lot better, for example, in Photoshop. And I was reading an article, I don't know if anyone here has seen it, but it looks like the new release of GIMP, which is the freeware graphic image manipulation program, they released a whole new set of tools, a new version, which now supports 32 and I think 64-bit. And they're releasing a bunch of plugins for astronomy, so they finally have recognized that astronomers for years have complained that GIMP was not really that good for astronomy purposes. So that's what we're looking into as well. Okay, so now what I want to do is actually get in. There's a video link here that shows this, what I'm going to walk you guys through, so that if you were ever off doing this at home or wanted to check it out later. So let me move back to here. And I've got something loaded up. So the image you just saw, I have it loaded up in Registats. Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Is it necessary after work to any of those other options, box over there, to do all again, or say?
No, you don't. You can change everything around. Yeah, that's the last step I do. I'll wait and change everything around, and then I'll do all of my last step. Yeah, it'll show you in that preview box. Correct. Yeah. So I would. Yeah. Yeah. The other thing is, you probably want to do that in terms of wanting to not apply your change, because you may go and change something else. You're like, ooh, wow, that doesn't work well with the change I just made. So at least you can go back and change it. Whereas if you hit do all every time, you can't go back once you've done that. So that's a good point as well. So this is the API, and the link that I'll show you at the end. You can actually download this file if you want to tinker around with it. But this is the basic raw image and the raw file here. You can't really see, you just barely see it. That's one thing I love about the processing and stacking and the wavelet is the I/O is right here, just off to the side. I can just barely see it on my screen, but you really can't see it at all. And so the first thing I'll do is go into the Align tab here. Okay, this is frozen already. Start this back up. So and you'll notice this is an API. I did not do individual image files. As I mentioned, some people like to do that. You'll see it pull in. There we go. For some reason, I don't know why it was kind of stuck there. So what you'll see is that as you go through, you have set align points. This is where you can set align points. There are all these other options here for setting the intensity and the selection and how it does it. You can read on a tutorial about what some of the best practice settings are there. And you can change the number of align points once you do it. You don't need a lot of align points for Planetary. You can keep that pretty low, as well as you've got some other options down here, which the screen's got it kind of crunched up, you can't see it. But you can also have it do center of mass, which is also works well for planets as well. But I'm just going to go ahead and click on set align points. See here, it just picked up 11. And then so I think the problem I have is I can't click the go button.
Before you do that, those 11 points, you dial that to 11.
Yeah, I can actually change it to go and pick up weaker one, so you see a change of 13, and notice how I picked up one on the right-hand side here. And so that's really not a valid data point. So you've got two options. You can actually come in and move this down. And what you're looking for is some of the brightest points in the image. If you let the program do it, what it basically does is it scans the picture and basically says this is the best aligned point. Now if you notice I did something that I told you guys you should do and I didn't do it myself. And that was I really should start with the first frame, right? I should scroll through so you see how it changes. And so what I should do is look for, so see how that one's kind of blurry? I can come back and let's see. So around here is a little bit better. One to think about. Right there looks pretty good. So if I do my set of line points again, you notice I picked up 9 stronger points. And again, if I go to the left, this time it's actually picking up that same one that's off to the side, so I move it off to the right so I don't have that. And it's really, like I said, for Planetary, usually a few line points is going to be good enough. So I think what I'm going to do is actually switch over to the video. That's why I did a video, was in case this did not work. Because the button is down here on the bottom, click go. It's just static. Let me see, I think I can change. Do you know if this projector handles the resolution?
I don't know.
Okay, let me just do a quick check. It not go to the video. So let's see. Okay, I think I can do that. Okay, so there we go. So now you can see on the bottom here we've got where I was talking about earlier. You've got alignment setup, you've got a region of interest where you can just say, I only want to focus on these pieces of the screen. You can show your alignment parameters. And this is where I was talking earlier about limiting it to the lowest quality, best number of frames, etc. And this is where I scroll to start. So now I'm just going to click the align button. And you'll see it run through, and it goes pretty quickly. If you've cropped down your image, that's one of the things that this helps with, is that it's going to go really quickly through it, because it's not having to process the whole big, huge frame every single time. And as you can see with this one, I've got 1,200 frames. While it's doing that, one thing I'll mention is that you do want to keep that in mind when you're doing Planetary as well. And as I believe, and so someone will probably correct me here and will know the correct answer, but about 4 minutes is about all you should do on Jupyter. In one set. The reason why Jupyter rotates so fast that it will begin to smear your image because of the rotation of the planet itself. And so when you see someone do, an all night, for example, they broke it into chunks and then processed individual chunks of it. But I believe about 4 minutes or so is about the most you want to do with one shot with Jupyter. So as you can see now, if you look here, it's showing me where frame 889 is, 869, sorry, which would be 90% of the frames. All right, so what I can do is if I scroll to the right, you can see that these look pretty good. They're not, they're not really bad, they're not really blurry. But if I get down here, they start getting a little blurry, so I probably don't want those. But I can scroll back here and keep these, and so that way I picked up another 200 frames, which is going to add to the quality of my data. You then just click limit, and what it does is it shows you the overall movement in your image. It's showing you the direction. So if you get some really weird looking lines, you know that probably you need to crop your video. Maybe the camera was shaking when it first started recording. You've got something in your video file or in your image set that's not good. But this looks fine. It's able to track it. And so from here, you've got some other things you can use. The default stack size, which is what I'm going to stick with. You can actually do normalization for frame intensity. So if over the period of your frames, it's kind of maybe a cloud would pass, maybe you got a little dimmer, you can actually have it normalize that. This is where you can stretch the histogram. I haven't had good luck with that one either. Is there a question right
Can you explain to me what those lines, what do they signify?
Yeah, so what these lines here signify is that the overall movement in my images is down and to the right. So in other words, when I was taking the image, Jupyter, because my tracking, because I was just doing this with an Alt-Tab mount, Jupyter was sort of moving in the eyepiece.
Okay.
And that's what it's showing you is the direction that Jupyter was moving. So it's saying, hey, I see movement, is this right? That way if you see, let's say that you had a perfectly still image in the middle, and it comes back and says, oh, I see movement, you know something's wrong. And it stacked it wrong, something's in there corrupting its interpretation of your data. So that's what those lines show you, is what's the direction of movement. And then it's showing you, of course, what's the center of where it's aligning on for each of those points. That's what the little yellow dot is. You can also de-rotate your images. So let's say that you're, and again, RegiStacks is not just for Planetary, it's also used for deep space. And so, you know, if you're doing long-term images, you may end up with a rotation in your image as you go through the night. This allows you to actually create another AVI from what you've done here if you wanted to go back and reprocess it later. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to click on Stack. While it's doing that, it'll take maybe about 30 seconds to run through. You can see this button here for LRGB. That's what creates an additional luminance layer. And so it artificially creates a luminance layer out of your data. And that's the one that I mentioned earlier. I haven't had really good luck with that one. To me, it seems to create hot spots in my image, white spots. But maybe for deep space, it does work well. I don't use RegiStacks for deep space. I only use it for Planetary. I use other software, Deep Sky Stacker, for my deep sky stuff. So now I'm going to stack the image. And as you can see, this is where I made my fatal flaw for those many years. And that was I clicked on Save Image, emailed it out to all my friends, and said, hey, look what I did. And had no idea I was leaving some beautiful image quality on the table. And so this did not change. This is still the same place. And so again, if you just click on Save Image, you could be done and move on. What you have to do is click on the Wavelet tab, and this is where you see the whole change. I was playing around with this last night, so as you can see, I left it on the Gaussian. I'm sorry, on the default. But this is where if you install RegiStacks out of the box, it comes to this screen when you click on Wavelet, which is your Gaussian. And as you can see here, you've got this automatic whole wavelet setting. This does some automatic settings in the background, as well as holding your wavelet setting from one session to the next. You've got your initial layer, your step increment. So what the step increment is, I mentioned this in the logarithm, think of that as a multiplier. And so what happens is if you move that up to 1, 2, 3, when you move the slider, it moves it a lot. It multiplies what you're doing. So you'll see that it really changes your image. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click, well, actually I won't. Let me not click use wavelets. And then I'll move the slider probably over to here. And as you can see, I'll do that again. So here's where I started. You see how it's kind of blurry? And I'll slide it all the way over to the right. And you'll see now suddenly, you know, I'm starting to get a little bit more detail. And that's just off the top layer. Again, unfortunately, I apologize. I don't have more details about how this really works under the covers. But what I've typically seen is 1 and 6. So my top and my bottom layer seem to have the most effect on the image. When I start getting into the ones in the middle, it just seems to create more problems in my image than it does anything else. But again, you can see that as I move it, you're seeing it sharpen up even more. And the moon is actually starting to pop out quite a bit on the image as well. Now, if I click Use Link Wavelets, though, what's going to do is it's now going to link those two together when it calculates everything. And so what you'll see is this. So if you remember, I mentioned that every time you do something, and there's no free lunch, right, it's going to cost you something. And so this has cost me a lot of data, image in my data rather. So now it's going to be grainy, it's going to look bad. And you've got some great looking detail if you kind of squint through all the noise that's in there now, but we've over-processed it now. And so I have a couple of options. One is I can just ease my sliders back, and then you'll see that it takes it out and says, okay, I'm not giving you as much signal, but I'm also not giving you as much noise. And that's how you should think about it. As you move it to the right, you're saying, hey, give me a little bit more signal that's hidden in there, but you're also going to end up giving me some more noise just out of as an artifact of what happens. And so when I slide it back, I'm saying, okay, a little less signal, but a little less noise. And the good news is, you typically pick up more signal than noise through doing this, and so you got to find that right spot. I know that's probably the burning question on everyone's mind is, well, what is the right setting? What's the right spot? There isn't one. And every single image is different. I could take another image file of Jupiter that I've done, load it up in here, and the settings will be different. You just have to play with it. This is the art part of the processing as you come in and you start moving around with this. Now, what I want to do is move this over, though, where it starts to really get a little bit grainy. And then what I can do is crank up my denoise. And so you just click on the button here, you'll see it going up. And what you'll notice is it starts to clean up a little bit. Now, as I mentioned, though, this is where you're going to see these colors start to become more and more, a lot more contrast between them. You'll see I start getting a white spot here in the middle. And so that's what's happening is it's costing me color information between the gradients. But as you can see, it's much, much clearer. So you really want to find that sweet spot between how much do I denoise and don't throw away too much data versus how far do I take my sliders over. I think layer 4 on this one had a good bit of information. There you go. So I just slid 4 over. So I mean, you can see it's really starting to look nice now. And again, what you can do is you can take this as crazy as you want, where it doesn't even look like a real image anymore. It gets to be really bad looking. So you have to find that spot that looks really good for you and what you're going for. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch over to default. And you can see it split these over to look like they're in the same place, but I wanted to show you that with this one, I don't have to worry about the denoise setting. I don't have to worry about the sharpen setting. It's going to take care of that stuff for me in the background. And all I have to really do is worry about sliding these. And as you can see, it does a pretty good job. I think it finds a good balance between what my signal to noise ratio is for me automatically, sharpens it up a little bit, and then you can see I'm getting some pretty good clarity out of the image there. Okay, so I'm over processing it a little bit on purpose, but this is just so I can show you this. This is where you would click on the gamma panel, and this will allow you to do an S-curve just like you normally do. So if you see how I start moving that, whenever I have to let it go though. If I click and slide, it doesn't change the image. I have to click, move it, and then let go. But you can see if I wanted to go in and start messing with the gamma and changing the highlights in the image, I can do that. Right click on the line somewhere else to add another point, and then you'll see it change. And again, I can try and take some of that hot spot out of it. You've got a lot of different options for imaging. For doing this. And then what you want to do is double click to reset it if you get yourself out into trouble. And again, because I have not clicked do all, none of this has been applied yet. So that's the good news is I can do that. I can double click and get myself out of trouble if I really get this thing not looking good. So last time I'm going to back these down just a hair. We got a little too aggressive. And what I would finally do is take this into probably Photoshop to get it touched up a little bit more. And then all you do is you click on do all, you'll see it blur back up, and it's going to apply to the whole image. And then basically you can go from there and you've got a great looking image. So, and again, you've got a nice shot of the moon that was there, cleaned it up really nicely. And that's basically the premise of it in Registax in terms of processing and using the wavelets. So final few pieces for you here. Let's load it back up. Final points. I mentioned that there are other programs out there, but I think Registax really does a good job. It hasn't been updated in a while. Version 6.1 is the latest version that's out there, and they really haven't put any effort. There's still a community behind it, but there hasn't been a release, and I didn't see any information about any upcoming releases. But to be honest, it works well. I think it does a nice job of handling it. I like the simplicity of it. I like that to me, it's a good balance between the control I can take over versus if I want to have it simple. And it is, in this version 6, is optimized for better processing. So version 5 is very slow. Version 6 uses as many processors as you have, so I don't know if you noticed at the top it said it was using 4 CPUs. So the other program didn't do it, it was single-threaded. This was multi-threaded, so it operates a lot faster. So I'm a big fan of Stacks. I've already mentioned about planetary rotation. Don't forget about that. That can frustrate you if you, especially when I'm using my Sony Handycam, I get all excited, and before I know it, 10 minutes have gone by, and I start processing it. I'm like, oh wait a minute, this is a mess. What's going on? And again, as I mentioned, common best practice: just do your stacking and your wavelet within Registax and do the rest. And the last takeaway is, don't be afraid to try anything. Pretty much half the configurations I tried, somebody told me don't do that. It's stupid. That's not going to work. I had all you name it, duct tape and everything else just to get a camera on my scope. I had it, and I got something out of it, right? And I learned something through the process. That's probably the most important thing. Every way I went through something, I learned something that I should or should not do. This is relevant to today, since in a couple hours here we have a partial eclipse. Don't forget, this works for the sun, works for the moon, not just planets, as well as terrestrial objects. So this is really neat if you're getting into a situation where the clouds are not cooperating as they have been lately. Robert and I were actually on his rooftop probably about 2 months ago, and the clouds rolled in. We're like, what do we do now? And we were in downtown DC, so actually about almost a mile away was the U.S. Capitol. I don't know if you've ever seen the statue on top. So I took a video of the statue, and I was shocked when I got home. I stacked it, put wavelets on it, and you could see finite details on that statue on top of the Capitol. It's really cool. So don't forget, you can use it for other things as well. And then lastly, we'll get into the question part. I am going to post this. If you can just remember my name, that's an easy way to find it. It's davehudson.net/SRSP. So this presentation is there. That image file I went to process is there, as well as the little video that showing me processing. So you can get all the information, all the other links, all this information is there for you. There's a contact button. I'd love to hear, see if you guys have done some great work. Some of the stuff you saw here today, I'd love to hear back on it. Any questions, comments?
When you say image, are there options on how to, let's say, get
believe, are your two, and a JPEG, I believe. Let's actually have a look. Let's see. So you can do a 16-bit TIFF, a BMP, a JPEG, a FIT, and then a 16-bit PNG as well. So, oh, sorry.
Do that.
There you go.
Compared to TIFF,
Yep.
is better.
So, yeah, I think your, well, actually, a FIT file should be actually your best one. The FIT file should preserve the most data in your image, but the TIFF file is uncompressed as well, so it's going to be pretty good as well. The problem with this, as you can see, is it will say that it's a 3-channel TIFF, so it'll be 3 different files. For one for red, blue, green, and blue. But yeah, I typically save it as a TIFF out of here, and then I'll pull it into Photoshop and work with it. But those are your options. You can just do a BMP. If you just, if you're not worried about processing it any further, and you just want to save it, share it, you can save it as a JPEG or PNG, either one. Any other questions? Yes.
A really basic question, Mac versus PC works.
It works on both. It does work on the Mac. Actually, this is one of the few programs out there that actually works for the Mac, PC, and Linux. So if you usually can get Windows and PC and Mac, but you can't get Linux, and this one actually works on all three. Yeah, and it's fully open source. I believe you can actually download the source code yourself if you wanted to add on to it.
Hey, for the example you showed us with Jupiter, you said before you input it into RegStack, you ran that through Casper?
I did. That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, the original file was so again, remember I did it with a Sony Handycam. And I think it was on the slide, but I didn't call it out. I really wanted to call out that, you saw I now have an 8-inch SCT. I had my 10-inch dock, but I've since gotten rid of that. But I did that with a 5-inch ETX, 125. So I did it with a 5-inch SCT, and I really wanted to call it out and say, look, I didn't have some big, huge scope to get that beautiful picture of Jupiter. I used a 5-inch scope. But yes, but I did it with a Sony Handycam, that image it's HD, so it's 1280 by 720, and so it's just a huge file and a huge image. I think the original file is like 1.5 gig or something, and then I put it in the castrator, and it comes out as like a 300 meg file, and it's just Jupiter itself.
Just Jupiter.
Yeah.
You have to set the areas cropped out?
You do, it automatically guesses for you, and it's usually pretty good, and then I just kind of cropped it in a little bit more. So. Yeah.
Again, castrator Mac versus PC?
That one I don't know. I can't go to the website here. Yeah, I don't know the answer. That's a good question. I don't know if I have that one for multiple platforms.
Because I have access to both, and it just makes a lot of sense if some of the programs don't work on the Mac,
Right.
I might as well just do everything on the PC.
Yeah, I'm a PC guy, so I actually don't know about castrator. That's a good question. He may have it. I'm not sure. Any other questions? Yeah.
Well, you answer your question by saying, work your image in Photoshop, because I've tried working with different boxes. I always seem to end up at some point with another grazed box off to the side.
You talking about in RegStack?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was just saying the same thing. That's why I don't even bother. Once I stacked it, I literally stacked it, apply my wavelets, and off to Photoshop. Yeah, because I don't have RegStack just doesn't do a good job in the post processing for me. Yeah. And then, like I said, I haven't tried GIMP, but I know that, and GIMP, by the way, doesn't work on all platforms. It's for Linux, Apple, and PC. But I haven't tried a new version, but I did see the article I think it was last week, that they released a new version, and it's got a lot more astronomy friendly.
Could you put your last slide down?
Oh, sure. And as this comes up, just to highlight again, all of this stuff, it's actually just a Dropbox folder, so you can easily download any of this stuff, the presentation, the core files. There's a link to RegStacks. Pretty much any of these, if you just Google that name, if you just, RegStacks, Avid, VMux, Virtual Dev Castrator, it'll come right up as the first result. And I didn't see any nefarious sites that were pretending to be these guys. And I did Google all these last night to make sure these worked. And so you shouldn't be worried about getting some bad software.
Is there any reason why you can't use a single lens reflex in this video mode?
So I'm glad you asked that. So the question was, so what do I do today? What do I do? So I started off with DSO with a DSLR, and I started doing Planetary with that. And so absolutely, you can do some great stuff with the DSLR. What you should do is use the live view mode If you have an EOS camera, Canon, there's a program called Backyard EOS that actually takes advantage, and it gives you a true one-to-one resolution for doing Planetary, which is fantastic. It does a great job. However, what has really surprised me is I bought a Next Image 5. I have a Celestron Next Image 5, which is a Planetary camera. Blew away my DSLR. I was shocked. I did not think, I thought the DSLR would have would do much better. For some reason, I've just gotten amazing images out of the Next Image web camera. And I just bought a ZWO camera, Planetary camera, and that one's supposed to be amazing as well. It does really high frame rates, good quality camera, etc. But a DSLR, again, give it a go. I mean, I've gotten some beautiful images with Planetary on it, and you can use the live view mode. And that's a great point as well, that, you know, the DSLR or even a point and shoot camera, the great thing about it is you just put it in video mode, hit the record button, you don't need any special software, you don't need anything, you know, just getting it connected.
What was the last brand that you mentioned?
Which one was it?
The one that you're using right now.
I'm sorry, it's the Celestial, ZWO was the very last one that I mentioned, yeah. So ZWO is fairly new entry into, I don't know, it's been a couple of years now, I think, that they've introduced a new lower line of CMOS cameras. And they've been getting a lot of good reviews. The only problem, and this is spotty, it's like any new hardware, but this is probably more on my end of a problem, but people have reported problems with those cameras because they do capture, I forget what it is, a ridiculous size. It's like 1600 by something. It may be even higher than that. If you don't have a USB 3, it'll choke your USB port down. And on my machine, if I'm not careful, it'll crash my machine because it just can't handle the throughput because the image is so huge. And it's doing it like 60 frames per second. So that amount of data is just, I mean, it's just cranking through a tremendous amount of data. But if you've got an Apple, I bet you it'll handle it wonderfully. Because it probably has FireWire, I think, on the Apple. So it would probably work great on the Apple. Or USB 3 would probably work really, really well. I just have to be careful with my ZWO camera and not overdo the frame rate and the resolution, or it'll crash my machine.
That camera is just video for Planetary, or does it also do sky still?
You can do, which one? I'm sorry, just saying. The ZWO has basically 3 modes. It'll do, it has a little dome lens, so you can do all sky. And then it does Planetary. And then people do use it for deep sky. The only problem is it's quite noisy. So when you start, it isn't cooled and it's pretty noisy. So once you get to over 30 seconds, it gets so noisy that the images are not very useful. Yes, sir?
Just a comment on the DSLR with the video. I had read that it's recommended to capture video Planetary with 640 by 480 resolution. A lot of times it's not defaulted to that. You have to actually go on the camera and change the setting to 640 by 480. So that may be one reason. But
no, I'm glad you said that again. So that's why it's always better to have more heads than one thinking, right? That's another great point. So to me, you know, I'm one of those. You know, I'm like, what was it, Tim the Toolman, right? You guys remember that show? You know, I'm the guy that's like, I'm giving the most power, and that's what I used to do. I get a webcam, and the first thing I look for is how high will it go in resolution. And what you don't realize is a lot of those use a method called interpolation. So what it's doing is it's making up the image. So yes, it's giving you 1024 by 768, but it's actually all it's doing is multiplying 2 pixels that are the same to give you that big image, right? So what that means is that a lot of times you do go 640 by 480 will give you a much better quality image because it's a 1-to-1 pixel ratio. So every photon that's hitting a pixel is showing up as a pixel on your screen. Whereas if you go to higher resolutions, a lot of times the image sensor isn't that sensitive. It's actually what it's doing is just saying, okay, I'm going to take this photon and put it in 4 places, and they give you a bigger image, but it's not actually any more data. And so that is a great point that you don't always want to go run off and put it at the highest resolution. You need to check the image capability on the chip.
So going to the megapixel, in other words, an 8 versus a 12 DSLR, you're not going to get that much?
No, you would in that because you're actually talking about you're talking about the micron size on the chip, the actual sensor chip itself. So with those cameras like a DSLR, you're getting a better sensor. You're able to capture more photons per, or I guess it's kind of how that would be more. It's 1 pixel for one photon versus it's being spread across multiple pixels. So short answer is yes. You're better off if you can get a higher pixel camera, but you just got to be careful. Look at what the specs are on the camera. But I think in the DSLR world, it's pretty well. if it says it's a 12, it's a 16, it's a 20, you're getting a better quality chip that has more capability. It's the webcams you gotta watch out for. Those are the ones you often see where it touts that it has the capability of going higher than the chip's actually possible.
Are you using 640, 480 on your next image?
I am actually. Yep. Yeah. So in the on the next image, that's what I shoot in now, and I did the same thing with the next image. I cranked it up to, I think it goes to 1045.
Crank up, I think I'm going to get a little better, sharper picture. I'm just not good.
Yeah. So go back to 640 by 480, and I think you'll be shocked. I was blown away. I was like, it's just counterintuitive, right? You go to a smaller image size and you get a better picture. So, any other questions? Comments?
Would that be true as well for the backyard look?
So what?
Because it's just using the line.
So yeah, so Backyard EOS is a software package written specifically for the Canon EOS line of cameras with the Digic chips. They are working on a Nikon version, but it actually does. So it's the way that the developers can use the API interface to the camera. It actually does read it in the raw mode, and so it actually forces it to I think it's 640 by 480 when you do that. So it's going to give you, using Backyard EOS, you're going to get, if you use their mode of Planetary, it's going to give you the optimal picture. You know what though? Read Backyard EOS's manual on that, because I think there is a setting in your camera that you need to change. I can't remember what it is, but I do think there is a setting in your camera that you'll want to change so that it doesn't, so it gives you the true 1:1 resolution. I forget what it is. It may have been fixed since the last API.
I think it's the 5X setting.
What's that?
I think it's the 5X setting.
Yeah, 5X, that's it.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what it is. Yeah, read that so just to double check. But Backyard EOS in the live view mode, it will capture it in the 1:1 native mode. But there is, yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head what that setting is. There is one setting to check. And it does tell you in the manual.
Do you have any recommendation on exposure setting for Planetary? I'll read people that say people set it too clear if you're looking at it.
You mean for the camera? I'm sorry, for DSLR or just in general?
I guess it depends.
Yeah, it's going to depend on the camera. Well, that,
The image you're seeing, you want to
Right.
look exactly how the picture's going to look.
So this is an area where I'd be willing to take any advice, right? So on Deep Sky, you get a nice histogram. You know where you want your histogram to be when you start imaging. On Planetary, I haven't really figured that out. I just go by how it looks to me. Is it washing out, or am I getting not enough, or is it too faint? And again, there's so many factors. Which planet is it? What's the atmospheric conditions? What size scope? But typically they're very, very slow image. Very slow exposure times. But I just kind of eyeball it. I don't. I'd love if anybody can tell me of a good software that will show you the best optimal setting for a Planetary. I'd love to see it. Anything else? I appreciate it. Yeah, I hope so. Well, I'm back here on the south side, so feel free to stop by if you have any other questions about ridge stacks. I'm not an expert, but I've learned a lot of mistakes not to do it.
There's a couple of very specific pitfalls I've run into that you gave me